Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and the way I've got my worm bins arranged here is it's kind of in an S pattern. So I start here with the oldest, and every time there's something a little bit newer, it gets put alongside, and then it goes straight down and back again and straight down again. So that's the order I've got them all arranged in. This is the oldest, which at this point has gone through two of the three phases that I usually use when I run a worm bin, where I compost in the bin for a while. Then I let the bin sit for a while, really let the worms pick through the remaining scraps in the material. And third, I work on separating the worms from the castings. In this case, we're going to start into the migration process. I guess there's always the option, you could just sort of start picking through the material under a bright light, and as the worms squirm down, you could pull the material off. That's kind of the instant 1, 2, 3 way to take care of it. But it is a little bit time consuming. It's kind of a contradictory there, right? So time consuming, yeah, when you're doing it, but in terms of getting the job done, it gets it done that day within a couple hours or maybe even less. Whereas the process we're going to follow here with the migration usually takes a couple weeks. So if you're not in a rush, you save a few hours of your own time, and at the same time you're letting the worms do all the work. Alright, so we're going to get this system today after 40 days of what I call that foraging second phase. I think we're ready to initiate the migration of the worms. This is the other bin, by the way, that I got the European night crawlers running in, and it's also in that foraging mode, but it's a couple weeks behind, I believe. And the material's definitely not as mature, so we'll get to that one soon. So that'll continue foraging. But for today, we're just getting my oldest worm bin initiated for migration of the worms out of the material. So we're gonna grab that bin, and well, we'll get to work soon. Alright, this is what I came up with. I improvised a table. I guess that was the little joke in me panning out and having no table in the middle of the room, because if you're a regular, you'll know that I usually have a table right in the middle of the room. It's just a couple boards set up on a couple sawhorses, but I got a project going on where I needed the sawhorses, so it gave me a reason to disassemble our workbench. So this is just an improvised surface for us to get the job done today. So the way that usually works in my worm bins is that I take some food, which is something that these guys haven't seen any fresh food in 40 days. So that should make this pretty enticing in terms of getting them to kind of swarm around it. There's pumpkin here, there's a spoiled kind of partially rotting pepper here. I usually freeze foods, but this pepper is just, raw. Coffee as well. And to complement the fresh food, I use a little bit of fresh bedding. To complement the fresh bedding and fresh food, we're also going to pick through here and try to pull out any residual bits of leftover food, bedding, any large chunks of anything we could find. We're going to use that also as some of the ingredients to build up a migration zone, kind of a feeding area isolated on one side of the bin, into which we're going to try to lure all the worms. So let's peel off this plastic cover here and get started. The plastic is meant to preserve what moisture is in the material, and it does a nice job. On the top surface we've got some moisture, which can probably be seen as a somewhat darker, different color material, but there is a darker inner portion alongside a lighter outer, drier portion. But it shouldn't be terribly dry out there. The covering with that plastic bubble wrap was pretty thorough. So we're going to start right into the collection of anything large that we find. We're going to see what we could do about just, skimming through this a little bit and collecting a bunch of stuff that we could utilize to build up our feeding area with. Maybe it's a good chance just to pick through it really quick, just a little bit, to get a sense of how things look now after 40 days of foraging in here. There's baby worms occupying the material. The material itself has, imperfections. There's little sticks and stems, which in my bins always seems to be the last thing to go. sticks and stems from leaves, because I use a lot of leaves as bedding. But if you're not too picky about some of that remaining in the material, which I don't worry about, because I know that if you check back in a couple more months, that stuff's going to totally be gone. But yeah, this stuff's got such a nice dampness level to it. There's no one concentration of food anywhere. But you know what? Before we blend it in, there was actually a spot where we did try to take leftover bits of stuff. There might have been some food in there, so there might be something here we can consider as a concentration of food. It's what we were doing here is skimming this stuff past few times and always depositing it down the middle of the bin. So maybe before we start really disturbing everything, we can just go right in there knowing that that's where we left some of that and collect it up. And then we can really start this migration with material that's not littered with all kinds of stuff to distract the worms from wanting to find a way out of it. That's a pretty good sized chunk of mango seed, like the outer husk of the mango seed. This might be a chunk of avocado pit, or maybe more of the husk, outer husk of a mango seed. So I sometimes leave these larger chunks of leftover mango seed husks or whatever. If there's something larger in here, we'll pick it out now, but I do usually just kind of leave it as part of the material. I suppose if I had removed all of that every chance that I bumped into it, rather than just always putting it back in, that would have given the worms even greater incentive to focus on breaking down the stuff that I want them to really work on, like the sticks and stems of leaves. So I'm sure there were little improvements to the way I did this that I could have included. This little pile of stuff that we're picking together is one of them. Just like to sort of pick apart my method and look for opportunities to improve. Because to me that, I guess, would be an improvement, right? Because I don't have to wait forever for one of these systems to run its course. So if I can, maybe start focusing the attention of these little guys a little bit, rather than leaving distractions behind for them, we might be able to optimize a little. But there again, for most people, it's really not even a consideration. There's no real timetables or anything. But here in my wormery, we like to experiment with little, method. Little tests of our approach to doing things. Try this, try that. So we're just gonna see what we could do about picking up some little chunks of material, get a little collection together, then we could set up this feeding area here too. Stuff is a little bit dry, and hopefully that'll be part of the incentive that gets them to start moving, looking for a different place to be. I have to guess that these little guys are pretty much always on the move, kind of looking around for different types of feeding opportunities. So in time they'll eventually bump into what we're going to set up for them, which will be a whole bunch of really nice fresh and damp stuff with plentiful food all over the place, and hopefully that'll be enough to get them to stay, and we can start rounding them up. I've actually built up a fresh bin a few days ago in anticipation of us getting that first round of worms out of here. So the migration, I don't know, I wonder how long it'll take. To me it always seems like it's a function of how dry the material is that they inhabit, or how long it's been since they've gotten fresh food, or who knows, it's like a combination of all these things that either attract or keep worms in the material that they're occupying. So we've got a little collection of stuff, but not much really, if you think about it. I think in the past when we've done this, we've come up with much larger mounds of material, and we were nowhere near this thorough looking for it. But I think we've got a pretty nice collection, and we've got almost enough of an opening on this edge already to set up our new feeding zone. So let's keep moving all this stuff over here and clear out this far edge of the the system. So this is the front end of it where I got the label attached on the outside. This is where we're going to set up the feeding zone. Bring in that nice bedding that I showed you, stuff that I set up a long time ago. So it's kind of been aging there. It's all damp and mixed with leaves and other things, and it's just this nice prepared bedding that hopefully creates a nice cozy spot that the worms are going to enjoy hanging out in. Alright, not bad. I've got a pretty clean batch of material. It almost seems like if we were to just do like a quick skim of this stuff through a strainer or something, like with large openings, we'd be able to catch all this stuff in about 30 seconds. And then move right into the setup of the migration feeding area. So that might be something to try in the future. Maybe that'll be a little bit traumatic on the worms though. Kind of running all the material through a screen and capturing all the worms along with the stuff and piling it all up. I guess that will complicate things too. You want to pull the stuff out. But no, that would actually work well too, because then you'd have the worms and the stuff already that you put right into the starting thing, and then only the little tiny ones that fell through the screen would be the ones remaining needing to get lured out. So, maybe using the screen would be a good idea next time I do one of these. Maybe on that other bin of European night crawlers that we're going to eventually do this to soon once they're done. And that should only be another week or two from now, I think. So, alright, so let's start setting this thing up. So using my handy dandy knife, I went ahead and created these little perforated walls, which are certainly not meant to keep the worms from passing through. In fact, they're riddled with holes in the hopes that the worms will not view them as an obstacle. So I usually like to erect a little partition like this, just because it helps me, I guess it keeps the castings nice and clean, right? But for me, I think it's just a little bit easier to see, because once both sides start to look very similar to each other, it just becomes a little bit easier, oh, look at that, to see what you're doing. I was going to prop up the wall using these cardboard tubes, but it doesn't seem like it even needs it, because it's standing up just fine by itself. And not only that, but the cardboard tubes seem a little bit short. So let's grab ourselves a couple handfuls of our pre-made bedding over here. Stuff has got such a nice dampness to it. It's soaking in not only water, but I also put in a little bit of food for the microbes and the bacteria that I'm trying to cultivate within this material. So I poured in some juices that flowed out of some pumpkin that I had pulled out of the freezer, and as the stuff thawed, it just ejected all of its moisture that I collected up. So now we can start backfilling our wall a little as well. But let's begin piling in some of this delicious food that we got for these little guys. It's got a good amount of weight to it, this little container here. This stuff, I'm not worrying about thawing it out. I've already collected a good amount of juice. So all the juice that's going to come spilling out of this thing as it melts is going to go right into our feeding area here. And I got a feeling it's going to be a big hit. I got a feeling the worms are going to really enjoy that. So you know what? I've got this last piece of pumpkin here. Why don't we start filling in a few other things down in here too, surrounding the pumpkin. I got this thing of coffee too. Oops. Just dropped some on the floor. First time in I don't know how long this place finally got swept up. I know I dumped stuff all over the ground. Hey, you know what? The heck with it. It's a worm bin. If I picked up a little bit of something else, can't be much because I just swept up yesterday. Let's even further enhance this feeding area with some nice fresh grit to go hand in hand with the food. The grit that I'm using is pulverized eggshell. And then sprinkled on top of that stuff, we can use some of this collected chunks of old mango seed, maybe more of the same, another chunk of the same, as well as these little fragments of bedding that we located as we poured through the material, and it was kind of nice to see how little of that we found throughout the material. So that was kind of cool. Alright, so before I plop in those last little bits of coffee and that last chunk of pumpkin, just wanted to sprinkle a little bit more of this nice fresh bedding into here, just so there's stuff for that juice to suck up into. I guess it wouldn't matter so much if it went down to the bottom, but it seems like there's going to be a good amount of moisture floating around here in a little while. Might as well put some nice paper out there that's still got a little bit of absorption capability, I think, to catch it. But let's get the last of the food in here. There really ain't much. A little bit of coffee. That's funny. I guess when that piece of frozen pumpkin was stuck up against here, it caused this chunk of coffee to freeze too. And man, so much. Seems like such a huge piece. But now that I've seen what something like this turns into after all the moisture's been squeezed out of it, it really isn't that much food after all. It's mostly water, and I've observed that on a couple occasions now, and I never even really realized how much moisture was caught up within this stuff. A lot of times I'll use these coffee filters to sort of cover things up, but I think we're going to cover up with just more of this loose stuff, and just have that down in there so we can see what happens to it if it's just a little bit more submerged rather than sitting out on the top, where it probably wouldn't get a whole lot of action if it just sat out there near the surface. So I think we've got ourselves a pretty nice feeding area. Maybe we just throw a little bit more grit in here and then get everything leveled off. So it was funny because in my wormery here, I've always, you know, tracked how long things take and whatever. And for me, the record a little bit over a year ago now was 18 days to see a population of worms exit a batch of finished castings like this into a feeding area such as this, so that we can harvest the castings and move the worms into a new space. So I just broke that record a little while ago, maybe a week ago, with a bin that got it done in a fraction of the time. It's a different type of worm, so it, you know, it's not apples and apples by any means, but it was just interesting to see. So I'll be curious to see how long it takes for this population to clear out of these finished castings, which are pretty depleted of food at this point. So I think from that point of view, they'll be psyched about all that yummy pumpkin that we threw in here for them. And besides the allure of nice dampness, nice food, there's also going to be the flip side of that too, which is going to be basically allowing this stuff out here, the castings, to not continue recirculating their moisture because it won't be covered with plastic the way it was. We're just going to let this stuff gradually, gently air dry a little bit. I mean, not completely uncovered. We will bring in some of the coverings that we've been using in the past, so we can actually, at this point, maybe even, let's do it. Let's cover that up. A lot of times my feeding areas for this are not so large, so one of these would normally have to be flipped up on the corners and stuff to make it fit. And we could use this to cover up with out here on the finished castings. It's not much. It'll definitely allow for moisture to escape. And then the only other type of covering that we're going to include last here is the plastic, which we will concentrate only over the feeding area. I'm just trying to see if I can find portions of this that are a little bit more soiled and others that are a little bit cleaner. It doesn't really matter. It's worm farming after all, right? So why don't we do it this way? We'll get this end of it butted up. We'll bring this up to here, where there's a little bit of the finished castings covered, but not much. Maybe one row of bubbles. Or should we take it right up to the... I guess one row of bubbles takes us right to the wall. It even allows for a little bit of airflow through there. So maybe we could just use a little bit of coverage in this way by swinging one more fold back like this. Still continue to let this stuff dry off quite a bit, but maybe capture a little bit of the moisture over here. So we'll see how that goes. I think this should work pretty good. And at this point, it's a little bit of a waiting game, so we'll see how long it takes. But that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.